So for this week on CyberSchool, we're going to be going over RFID access control. This is kind of one of our more complicated segments that we'll be doing, so I wanted to cover a lot of the bases of, say, our standard intercoms, kind of just standard access control as we work towards these products. They're a little bit more complicated, so it kind of warrants their kind of own little special segment to kind of go over the RFID access control units. So we've really got 4 units in total. There's another unit that is just our keypad for access control, but we won't be really touching on that one too much today. We're really focusing on everything that's going to be using the RFID cards. So we've got basically 4 main products that we've got for RFID access control. We've got basically 2 options for intercoms and then 2 options for just the dedicated access control units. So for the intercoms, of course, we've got just our standard outdoor intercom with RFID, and we've got a video option as well. And then for the access control centric units, we've got just the standard RFID card, and then we've got the combination RFID and keypad unit. And that one's pretty trick and allows a lot of different options and flexibility to that. And we'll definitely get to covering that a little bit more in depth. So before we get into too much about our products, let's talk a little bit about what RFID is before we kind of get into what these products do and how to use them and all that good stuff. It's really important to have an understanding of what RFID is. RFID means radio frequency identification. So it's really just a way for cards or tags that can be used as a form of identification, like a regular badge that you would have to show to a guard or something like that, or even say if you're out in California and you've got and you're driving up in the Bay Area, or even some parts of New York, they've got little fast passes, so that way you can go in different lanes on the highway that you pay to opt into. Those all use RFID cards. And then, I mean, heck, even if you've gone to your local Walmart, your Target, any like kind of store, and you pass through as you're going out the door, you pass through those kind of, I don't know, they're basically big RFID readers, and they read the little security tags that could be on different products that you might purchase at a different store to let if you're stealing something as you try to walk out. So we use RFID all the time in our daily lives, and they're really, really flexible and great options for access control or just really any kind of equipment tracking. When you're dealing with RFID, there's 2 different types of readers that you can have. They can either be low frequency or high frequency. And an easy way to tell those 2 apart is either the low frequency is something that has to be read really close, where you almost have to touch your card or your tag to the reader, whereas the high frequency can be read, quite a length away. Say for example, like when you're walking out of a store, you're not necessarily scanning all your products against the kind of things that as you go out the door, or if you're in that fast pass lane, it just automatically reads, and the reader's probably 10, 15 meters away from your car. So there's a lot of different complex ways that you can use RFID tag readers. Again, they can be either close range or far range, and they fit really well into the security trinity. And there's really four kinds of things when you're dealing with security in just the general mindset. You've got either something you have, and that's exactly where RFID cards fit in, something like a password, a passphrase, a key code, and then something you are, either like your retinal scan, if you've got something super complex, we're dealing with Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise level stuff, or just a simple fingerprint reader. That's your security trinity, something you have, something something you are. And those are basically the 3 big pillars of any type of security. So why would you want to use RFID for access control? First and foremost, people are already pretty used to it. It's pretty normal in the terms of the industry for access control. Everybody's pretty much used to it, either just from using it in their daily lives, like I said, with just regular clothes or something, clothes or electronics that you might buy at a big box store, or if anybody's worked for a relatively large company, they've probably got some kind of access control, and a lot of them issue RFID cards for badges to just be able to track who goes and comes through a particular door. And it's got a really high level of security as compared to other options for access control, just because you're dealing with something that you have to be able to get in that door. Just as an example, comparing it to, say, a key code that you can even find on some of our other products, you're dealing with, potentially buttons that you have to punch in to be able to hit that code. And with just having to punch in buttons, somebody could sit there and just punch in buttons endlessly until they find a code that works. In that same scenario with an RFID card, unless you've got an RFID card, you can't do anything with that dang reader. Like, unless you've got a card that it can read, you can't really get in. So it makes it a high level of security as compared to other options for access control. Another nice thing with RFID cards is it's relatively easy to implement and manage. Once you get everything set up, it's really easy to deal with issuing cards and creating new cards, or even implementing new readers. It's really just the step of getting everything implemented, which can be a little complicated to start, but not particularly complicated in comparison to a lot of other things. And the really nice thing to kind of summarize it is you get a detailed log of who entered and when. So, and this is common with most RFID readers, especially R units, but pretty much most across the board. When you're going and dealing with an RFID reader, you basically get a log of whose card was scanned and when that particular card was scanned. So if there was potentially any theft or anything going on at that particular location, you would know because it would all be recorded in the access log. So it's a really great way to go and not only incorporate an access control system, but be able to log all that information, because it's all well and good if you go and have this fancy, this fancy schmancy access control system, but you don't know who the heck is using it and when they're using it. What's the point of implementing something like that? And just, you might as well just issue everybody their own key to be able to get in. You basically, if you're not going to track it, why use it? So how is CyberData implemented RFID? Now that we know a little bit of background about it, we use low frequency RFID. So you have to be close to actually read the cards to the reader. We generally recommend placing your card or your tag flat up against the reader to be able to get a good read from it. And even if you don't, the unit will beep at you, so that way you get a good, that you need to try to scan again, so that way you get a good read off it. And when you're dealing with RFID cards, there's typically two norms that you can get pretty much across the industry, whether you're dealing with kind of a smaller implementation like ours or some of the other bigger box options that you might get from larger enterprise level solutions. And that's either the codes are programmed to use or they come pre-programmed. And the main difference is the level of security when you're dealing with these particular cards. The pre-programmed ones, typically you just, you buy a bulk of cards and they've got some kind of serial number that's listed on the card. And when you're going and enrolling the card, all you do is you punch in the serial number, you set the name for the person and when you want them to be able to use the card, and that's it. So they end up not being particularly secure as compared to cards that are programmed to use, where they're a little bit more complex because there's more steps that go into the actual programming to make it more complex. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but always just remember that cards that are programmed to use are more powerful and better encrypted as compared to cards that are pre-programmed. Now, our cards use a level of what's called AES 128-bit encryption for the RFID cards. So it uses a really long, basically, password. Effectively think of that 128-bit encryption as a password that would be used for the cards. It's at the most simplest level. It's not really a true comparison, but at the simplest level, it's really easy to think about it that way, where it's basically just that password that comes on the card. And the nice thing about having an AES 128 level bit encryption means that it's logically impossible to actually hack these cards in what's known as a brute force attack, where you just try, every different iteration of the potential option there for all 128 bits, which equals to 2 to the 128th power. That's bigger than most computers out there can handle right now. So it makes it logically almost impossible to actually hack one of these particular cards. So it makes it super duper powerful, which is why you'll see for a lot of different security cards out there, or say for RFID cards, or even for different like VPNs or other things in security, you'll all see them call out that AES 128-bit encryption. And that just means the level of security that you're getting with that particular type of encryption, and it's almost as good as it can get. There's better. You can of course go and you can step it up to say 256-bit encryption, or even 10,024-bit encryption, which is just ridiculously powerful. But it ends up being really, really secure and is a really great option for that type of security. And with our units, they can support 500 users, which is effectively 500 different cards that can be used at a single time. So it's really, really complex, and it gives you quite a bit of capability with a single unit. And the nice thing with our implementation as compared to others, and one of the reasons that RFID systems can get so expensive is because with most enterprise-based systems, you have to get a server and then a dedicated reader for each individual door, which just really blows up the cost to be able to implement something like that. You have to go and set up the server. Sometimes they have dedicated hardware for you to go and implement. Sometimes they give you, a little VM so that way you can just load it on your own hardware. And then you have to get readers for each individual door and wire them and all that kind of stuff. It gets really complicated and cumbersome to go and implement it. So it really makes RFID systems really usable for only the highest level enterprise level customers that can go out and spend all that money to not only get that fancy server that you have to get, but also get readers at each individual door, which just really balloons up the price and makes it, again, only usable for those real enterprise level customers. Where our unit is really targeted to those small to medium level customers where they need to only manage a couple doors, maybe 5-10 doors would be really usable. And it's best for that because everything is on box. Once you buy the unit, and of course you buy all the cards that you need to get, you are pretty much ready to go. You don't need to go and deal with any extra servers or anything like that. All you have to do is mount the intercoms in place and get them all programmed and set up, which we'll cover in just a moment here. And it gives you a lot of flexibility and capability to go and implement this for the common person, the small mom and pop shop that needs to control 2 doors and say that, they've got one entrance for employees, that come through the back and one entrance for customers. That way you can control both with RFID cards, makes you look cool, makes you look fancy, and it's just a really great option for access control. So what kind of access control devices do we actually offer? Like we covered at the beginning of the segment, we've got basically 2 different categories of RFID tag readers. We've got intercoms and access control, which would be our SIP Outdoor Intercom with RFID, part number 011477, or basically the same option but with video, our SIP H.264 Video Outdoor Intercom with RFID, and that one's part number 011478. And then we've got 2 more access control centric devices where they're really just designed to handle access control. And that would be either our RFID Secure Access Control Endpoint, part number 011425, or the RFID and Keypad Access Control Unit, which would be part number 011426. And that's the combination of both the RFID and Keypad that we'll talk about in a little bit here. So with intercoms and access control, they're great for entranceways, basically places that would be used by both employees and patrons or clients that would be coming into a particular facility. That way your general employees can just scan their own card and get in through the door and be on their merry way. And the patrons or the clients would actually have to press the call button and kind of go through the usual use case you would expect when somebody's using an intercom, where they, potentially calls a ring group, calls security, calls a dedicated secretary. They answer it and talk to, whoever's there, and then they enter DTMF on their phone to be able to trigger the onboard relay and open the door. And if you want to opt for it, especially in today's world of COVID and trying to maintain that social distancing, video can be super duper important, just so that way you can not only, hear who you're talking to, but actually see who's there. And with the big fisheye lens that we have on our cameras, you can see all the people that might be hiding behind a pillar, kind of waiting for that door to open so that way they can rush in and rob the place. So video is always a great option if you want to integrate that into your intercoms. Then, of course, we've got our RFID access control centric units. And of course, since these really only allow either for a RFID card or a key code to be scanned or entered, they're really not suitable for places where, patrons, clients, or customers might actually come through, because unless they've got a key code or an RFID card, that box on the wall does absolutely no good for them. There's no button for them to press, no way for them to be able to communicate with anybody. So it's basically just a box on a wall that they can't do anything with. So really one of these wouldn't be ideal for, say, the front-facing client or customer entranceway. This would really be better for, say, an employee parking lot, a back door, a shipping dock, where really only employees are going to be going through this particular entranceway or doorway. So that way it's just, better. You want to be able to suit the product that you have for access control to who's going to be using that for access. And then we've got an option for two-factor authentication if you really want to deal with an extremely secure scenario. And that, of course, would come in with our RFID secure access control endpoint, or RFID keypad secure access control endpoint. So that way, not only do you have to scan the RFID card that you have, something you have, and then you have to enter a key code, something you know. So that way you're using basically two of the pillars of that security trinity. All we need is an RFID or a thumbprint scanner or an iris scanner, and then we've got that full security trinity that's almost impossible to hack. But for the time being, two-factor authentication is super duper useful. You can also use it, and this is one of the ways that I always, kind of recommend to end customers if they opt for something like this, is go for that RFID/keypad secure access control endpoint, because it gives that flexibility. Say, somebody's having an off day and they park in their, their spot, and they're coming up and they're like, oh no, I forgot my badge. I have to drive, half an hour, 45 minutes back home to go get my card, so that way I can enter the building. If you've got that RFID keypad unit and you don't have it set up for two-factor, they can just punch in their own access code, because they get both an RFID card and an access code. So if you get one of those days where it's just somebody's kind of forgetful and they forget their RFID card, they can still punch in their key code and get in through the door. So that's a great option for really, again, those entrances or parking lot areas for employees, because it gives them that capability. If they forgot, as long as they can remember their car or remember their code, they're good to go and they can still get in. So now that we kind of covered what the products are, how to use them, what we offer, let's talk a little bit more about actually programming one of these things. And one of the important things you have to do with our units when you're dealing with the RFID tag readers is you actually have to set a passphrase to go and encrypt the cards. And this passphrase is basically used as a secret in air quotes, where that's basically, it's a phrase or basically a series of characters. It can be, like a regular password. It can be, really whatever you want. It could be just a whole bunch of random numbers and letters that you punch in if you want to go that route. But it's used during the encryption process. So that way it randomly generates stuff, and it's not just, say, based on some type of injection, say like time or something like that. Could be a little bit easier hacked, where if you're dealing with a custom passphrase, somebody would have to know that to be able to replicate the cards. So it makes it a little bit even more complex on top of that 128-bit encryption. It's super duper powerful when you're dealing with something like that. And one thing to keep in mind is you're going to have the same passphrase. So if you implement multiple of these RFID readers across a location, you're going to want to have the same, you have to have the same passphrase across all the different units, because this passphrase is used in decryption. So it's basically used, again, to just generate that AES key, that secret 128-bit key that actually encrypts the card. So it's super duper powerful and super necessary, and the longer and more complex it is, the better encryption that you have. So it's a really cool, capable way to go and set that. But once you go and set that we call the passphrase or the master key on the unit, then you have to go through and basically create all the different users. And to create a user, it's of course going to require a name and then a particular time that you want that card to be active. And say, for example, there's a couple of different ways that you could set it up. You could set it for basically all, say you'd probably want to issue that to, say, like your managers or something like that, where you don't want any time that their card would not work, where basically anytime they go and scan their card, whether it's, Monday o'clock, the network goes down and the network admin has to come in. If he needs to come in at 2 o'clock on Monday morning, his card needs to work. Whereas, your regular Joe Schmo office worker, or say your guy in the factory, his card would really only be active on weekdays, WDY, from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Say if you guys have flexible shifts where they can come in at 7 and leave at 3, or come in at 4, or, come in at 8 and leave at 4, something like that. It gives them that flexibility for that. But then if they try to come in outside of those hours, say even at 18:01, 6 p.m. or 6:01 p.m., they scan their card, that card's not going to work. Or if they come in on the weekend and they try to scan their card, it's not going to work. So you want to be able to set those particular valid times or those time frames on when these cards are going to be able to work. And then once you get all that set up, you set your name, your valid times, then you got to scan your tag. And that's where the that passphrase that we said earlier will actually come in to go and encrypt the card and generate that particular key for you. And then once you do that, it walks you through in the little pop-up that you get with it. And it makes it, it's all nice, easy to use. And then when you're done with that, you just hit save, and then you repeat that for all the other users that you need to do this with. So it's a really powerful way to go and program the cards. It's all really intuitive. Once you do it once, you know how to do it for all the different users. And the only difference with these units is if you've got that, again, that combination RFID and keypad unit, you have to go and then also enter that key code for somebody to be able to use not only their RFID card, but also that key code if they want to be able to use either option. So now that we've gone and we understand how the units work and how to go and use the basically set up all the cards, let's talk about setting up different access control units, because a lot of the times you're probably going to be setting up, maybe 2, 3 of these things. We'll of course have implementations where somebody's only going to need one. They've only got one entrance or exit to their location, but they might run into situations where they need multiple. So then you kind of need to determine how many security levels are going to be required. Essentially think, okay, you've got, both your CEO and, your Joe Schmo office worker. Are their cards supposed to be treated at the exact same security level, meaning that they can scan that at any of these RFID tag readers and get in? Are there only certain doors that certain people can use? How many security levels do you need? And that's important to consider when you're setting up these multiple different devices. We generally recommend that you start from the ground up and you build your base level, your most basic security level. Think your front entrance or your employee parking lot, where you're basically going to issue a card to every single employee. Everybody's going to need a card. Therefore, everybody's going to be able to get through that door. Then, say you've got 2 security levels. You've got your basic door, and then you've got a door, say your storeroom, where they've got different equipment that's stored. Say backup PCs, or say even to your networking room, where only certain people would want to be able to get in there. Instead of having to go and try to reprogram all the cards, which wouldn't work. The best thing to do in those types of scenarios is to set up your most basic level. Basically, set up your base level, then export that security list, import it into these other readers, and then delete the users that shouldn't have access. So it makes it a lot easier to go through and take that template and all that work that you already did for your most basic level and just restrict out the people that you don't need as you scale up in security level. And this can be done on multiple different points until you get to the top of your pyramid, to be able to go and say, okay, this is the most secure area. You're getting into the CEO's office. Only him and, like the head janitor have access to get into his office. Nobody else needs an RFID card to get in there. So that's just the general mindset you want to have when you're setting up these multiple different device access control devices. And I've got some different examples to go through with it. But one pro tip that makes it really easy to go and manage these things after you go and set one of these up and you've got them implemented is set up that auto provisioning server. So that way, when you go and make these changes, you can just push it to a particular list that's on your auto provisioning server, reboot all your units, or wait till the time where they go and check in to see if they need to auto provision, and they can automatically adjust themselves. So if you're dealing with multiple units across, say, 5 or 6 entranceways, it's a very seamless and easy process to go and have them all updated instead of having to go through manually and say, okay, we need to, restrict John, Cameron, Mauricio. We need to kick all those guys off for this access level. Just do it on one list and then auto provision it to all the other readers. So it makes it a really easy way to go and manage that. And that's what all, the good people would want to do. So for a good example here of just a single RFID tag reader, let's say you've just got one located at the outside of the reception area where, say, general customers would come in. And for this option, we'll have just your standard video intercom with RFID reader, and it would just sit there, and your general employees, all the people that would work in either 4 of the offices could just scan their card and be able to come on their merry way, whereas say a patron, say this is a dentist office as an example, they could go and press the call button and talk to the receptionist, the hygienist, and say, hey, I'm here for my 2 o'clock appointment. Okay, wonderful. We're not quite ready. We're still dealing with social distancing. Go ahead and hang out in your car and we'll give you a call and let you know when we're ready for your appointment. So that way it's a really easy way to implement it that can not only be used by your standard employees, your hygienist at your doctor, at your dentist office, or what have you, basically however you want to implement these. All those regular employees can scan their card and get in the door, and your customers, your patrons, your clients can go and use the intercom to be able to communicate with who's in there and gain access if necessary. So let's expand on that a little bit more, and let's say we've got multiple RFID readers, and this blue circle that we have on here denotes a particular access level. And as we can see that both readers have the blue circle around them, we know that they're both the same exact level. And we'll say the video intercom RFID tag reader that's down at the bottom corner, that one would be your general entranceway that would be used by customers, patrons, clients, what have you, and they would go and use that intercom to be able to gain access. Whereas the RFID card reader on the right-hand side of the building would be by, say, your employee parking lot. So that way, of course, since it's an employee-only parking lot, you're not really going to need an intercom there because all of your employees should have their RFID cards and they can just scan their card and get in the door and be able to go on their merry way. So this is just a good idea of how a setup with 2 RFID tag readers could work. Then let's expand and let's get a little bit more complex here. So now let's deal with these multiple security levels, which is something that we kind of talked about a little bit. The general security clearance is, of course, denoted in blue here to keep that same, whereas our higher security clearance is denoted in our orange. So that way you can be able to tell the two different locations apart. So for this option, for both of the general security clearance areas, we've got our standard outdoor intercom with RFID. So that way any of your general customers or your patrons can just be able to walk up, press that call button, and be able to communicate with somebody, whereas your employees can just scan their card and go on their merry way. And of course, we've got one of those at either location because the shared parking lot that would be on the left-hand side could be both for your customers or for your patrons. Of course, there's a sign on the door that says, for regular customers or patrons, please go around to the front to the actual reception area, whereas your employees can go and scan the card and come in through the entertainment room. No big deal if they come in through there, but you don't want your customers to be able to do that. Now let's say for your storeroom, where you've got different equipment that could be in there, or say different files for an HR area, where you want only specific people to be able to get in there and have access to it, you could have your second card, and that second reader would have that higher tip of the option for security clearance. So that way, say only your CEO, your HR people, say your management staff could be able to get into that storeroom, whereas, your general Joe Schmo or your janitor would try to scan their card to get in there. Oh, I got to change the trash can in there, or, I got to mop or clean up or something. They're going to scan their card and they can't get in there because they're not allowed to get in there. So it gives you that multiple level of security that you would want when you're implementing an access control system like this. So it gives you that kind of capability, and hopefully these different diagrams have helped you kind of understand these different security levels and how they can be implemented. So let's talk a little bit more about the access log, because this is something that's just so important when you're dealing with an RFID access control system. Is, like I said at the beginning of our CyberSchool, if you're going to spend all this money to go and implement a fancy access control system, you want to be able to know on who's using it, when they use the card, so that way you can be able to track it, say if somebody broke into it. If you don't want to be able to, maintain an access log and be able to tell when somebody came and went through a particular doorway, just to give everybody a key. If you're not concerned about it, why go and spend all this money to go and implement something like this? Keys are much, much cheaper than a regular RFID card reader. So access logs are super duper important. And on the right hand side here, we've got a good screenshot of our access log and what you can expect on the web interface of one of your RFID tag readers. We'll go through the different columns that we have here, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the capability of the access log, what you can do with it, the search functionality. So the leftmost column, we've got our event number. And these are just the different numbers of events that have been logged by the system. Pretty self-explanatory. Then we've got our timestamp that's measured in both day, of course, then your formal date, year, month, day, not the standard American format, day or month, day, year. We go a little different here, but that's okay. Then we've got your time measured in 24-hour time, and this would just be generated by the NTP server of your device. So that way it can go and actually be able to tell what time it is, which is actually pretty important for one of these things. One of the few products where the NTP sync is actually pretty important, because if you're going to have something that only works on a particular time span, you want that time to you want your device to know what time it is. So that's pretty important there. In our middle column, the action column, it tells you all the different actions that have been taken by the device. And one good thing that we can look at here, say for the right smack dab in the middle of our list there, line 137, that's where the valid tag for Paul, user ID number 1, was scanned. And all that says is that, okay, this is a valid card that was scanned. Let's check and see if it was authenticated, which we can see on line 138. The user was authenticated, meaning that it was used not only it was used and was read by the system and is okay, but then is also allowed to enter because it's within a particular valid time. So then we get the next two actions on line 139 and 140, which is the relay activation, which basically just says the relay was activated and the relay was deactivated, which you can tell from the timestamps was 2 seconds apart, meaning that the relay activation time was 2 seconds. So for every valid entry, with this great example of Paul there, or Cameron below, which is just another great option, a great way to see the particular actions, for every valid entry, meaning every time that a valid card was scanned and the person was allowed in, you're going to be dealing with 4 entries per that, or per 4 lines per valid entry. Then finally, of course, one of the cool features that we have on our security products, this is pretty much the same across all of our security products, but I think it's most useful really on any of them, to be honest, would be line 141, where you can see that at 2:45 p.m. we had a user blacklisted, and that was John's card number 2. So with the blacklist feature, that's it's a pretty common feature on a lot of different RFID readers. It's not, say, something that would be exclusive to our devices, but it's very, very important and useful when you're setting up any kind of access control system. So say, for example, like in John's example here, John got fired, John, did something wrong, or maybe John retired. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative like John got fired. Maybe John retired. And we went and, you've either got 2 options when you're going to be getting rid of a card. You can, of course, just delete the card, and then the card's not going to work and the person's not going to gain access. But you'd never know when that card was scanned, because the user was deleted. It would just say, unvalid card scanned. So then you'd never have any idea whose card was scanned. But if you blacklist that particular card, when that card is scanned, the device can take an action. It can either just make a local announcement right out of the speaker of course, the intercom units and say blacklisted code entered. So that way it might, potentially scare off that would-be aggressor. If somebody, had stolen John's card, he wanted to retire. He was card number 2, card number 1 went to the CEO, card number 2 went to, John, and, he wanted to frame it with his first paycheck that he got. He worked the company for forever, and, wanted to frame it. Well, somebody stole it from John. And with that blacklisted card, it gives you that capability to be able to tell that that card was entered. So the device can, of course, like I said, take an action. It can play that audio locally. It can multicast that audio, so it's a little bit less discrete, where instead of just playing it locally out of that device itself, of course, assuming it has an intercom, it can just send out a multicast message that says, blacklisted code entered, which is our default message. You should probably customize that to say blacklisted card entered, east side intercom, west side intercom, employee parking lot intercom, so you know where people have to go. but it can also do a little bit more of a discrete option, because sometimes you don't want to just make that big announcement that everybody hears that a blacklisted code was entered. Sometimes you want to be a little bit more discreet. You don't really want to scare away that particular aggressor, that would be a robber, that would be trying to gain access. Sometimes you want them to hang around, because maybe you want, security or the cops to come grab this guy. If they're trying to rob you, maybe you want, justice to be served there. So the intercom can actually go and make a call to a predetermined number. And this can actually occur with our units that I wouldn't necessarily consider an intercom, say our standard RFID tag reader or our RFID keypad secure access control endpoint. So even those units don't have they don't have a speaker or a microphone, they can still have a custom audio file loaded onto them. And then when that blacklisted code is entered, they can make a call and play that particular message. So it's a really, really powerful feature. I think blacklisting is just so important when you're dealing with any kind of access control unit, especially the CyberData unit, since we're here at CyberData CyberSchool. But if you're really dealing with any type of RFID access control unit, it's so important to consider being able to blacklist a particular user over just deleting their card, because it's sometimes more important to be able to track and see when a card was used than to just not have that card be valid. You wouldn't necessarily want to do that, say, in a hotel where, you're issuing, thousands of RFID cards over a weekend. But if you're dealing with, a small mom and pop shop or, a business where you're only going to issue so many cards and not issue a whole bunch more, it can be important to know to be able to check and see when that card was ever used, if it's ever used again. Somebody might steal it, not realize where it goes, and not ever try to use it. But you would certainly want to know if anybody ever did. So now with more to get back to our access log here after that fun little blacklist tangent, our units can store up to about 100,000 lines for their access log, which works out, of course, with four lines per valid entry to be about 25,000 valid entries. So depending on how active that door is, that could potentially last you a month or two, could potentially even last you more if you don't have that many cards. It really kind of depends on how many cards and how many people are actually going to be using the system. So it gives you, a pretty big capability to be able to store all that. However, it is not an infinite storage level. You're not dealing with your Google Cloud or your Apple Cloud where, it can essentially store, unlimited amounts of stuff, where we've only got the hard limit of 100,000 lines. So when that hard limit is reached, it's going to start overriding, of course, the oldest lines. And you might not want that to happen. You might want to be able to track, say, whoever has gone through this particular doorway for months, years, who knows how long you want to be able to track it, but you want to have that capability. So it's exportable in a CSV format, and you can actually go, and we would recommend probably about once a month or so, depending on how active you are with this particular unit, but just go in there and export the security log from the system. So that way you can get that CSV file, you can open it up in Excel, Google Sheets, LibreOffice, if you're one of those weird people on Linux. But you've got a lot of different options to go and actually store and then review this access log feature. We do have a search feature that's built into it that can index about 15 pages, which works out to be, I think it's about 10,000 lines. So you can get a pretty good amount of traffic that you can actually index and search through just on the unit itself. But if you want to be able to look at, say, line 95,000, you're going to need to export the file and be able to go through it. And frankly, tools that are better designed to be able to go through and manage those gigantic files. Our device probably could do it, but we decided that, hey, you've probably got, a dedicated computer. You're going to be implementing one of these in an office. Everybody's got computers. Excel, Google Sheets or LibreOffice are so much better at dealing with giant CSV files than your intercom. So do it that way. So at the end of the day, should I use an RFID tag reader for access control? They're a really secure option when you're dealing with any kind of access control, much more secure than, say, a regular key, which, can just be hacked, or, I guess you can call it hacking, but can just be jimmied, with some lock picks or even, drilled out in more of a brute force attack. which is probably your least secure option, which would just be a standard key. Then you step it up and you've got your key code, which would, be pretty secure depending on how you have it implemented, but still not super duper secure, probably about as secure as a regular key, because somebody could, just brute force it. Okay, 1, 2, 3 didn't work. Let's try 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 5, and so on and so forth. Kids will just sit there and press buttons until they get something that works. So, that is kind of insecure. But when you're dealing with an RFID tag reader, if you don't have an RFID card or an RFID tag, there's really nothing you can do with that dang reader, unless you've got some kind of fancy app or a Raspberry Pi, or if you're really trying to do some actual network penetration and you've got that capability to try to hack one of these units. I challenge somebody to try to do that with one of ours. Ours are pretty sturdy. It'd be pretty impressive if somebody could actually hack into one of ours. Possible, but it's a lot more secure as compared to the other options for access control units. So that's a great reason to move to use RFID. One of the other nice things that you get with it, and this is really just kind of the same for using any type of access control unit, is you get that detailed log of who came through that door and when, because all of your cards are registered to a particular user, not only a user ID, but a user name. So that way you know exactly who used that card at that particular time. So if you see somebody's card getting used on a day that they're off, or a day that they're sick, or, say they're not supposed to be using that card at all, you know exactly when that card was used and when that card was used. So it gives you that capability to be able to track who used the card, when they used the card, and even what door. So it gives you a lot of capability for, say, if you do eventually, you do somehow get somebody that comes in and robs the place, you'll know exactly what card was used, where it was used, and when it was used. So that way it really gives you that capability to be able to track it. Hopefully you can then, check in with your security cameras and be able to tell exactly who gained access, and, then get on the horn with your insurance company and get that settled. Now, if you opt for a two-factor option, that's just about as secure as you can get without having all three pillars of that security trinity. Again, something you have, something you know, and something you are. But a two-factor option is just so secure because it requires you to not only have something, but you also have to know something. So that way it's just another deterrent to those would-be attackers, because they might be able to guess that key code through brute force, or might be able to tell that certain buttons are worn down more than other buttons, so they can kind of guess at particular patterns and try different patterns of buttons. If you've got it set up for two-factor, they can get that key code, but they aren't going to have that RFID tag reader. So no matter what, they're not getting through. But for one kind of downside when you're dealing maybe specifically with our units, is they're really not realistic when you're dealing with an enterprise level facility. If you're going to be dealing with, say, 50, 60 doors, 100 doors, more than that, it might be more worthwhile and might pay off a little bit better to go with one of the more enterprise-centric RFID access control systems. Just because at the end of the day, the server's the most expensive part, and then you have to implement all the readers, which are relatively cheap. So it would probably be more beneficial in those real enterprise level deployments to go for one of, frankly, the RFID access control systems that are more suited for those enterprise level customers. But that's not what we designed the system for. We, again, designed this for the small to medium business, the small mom and pop shops that need to manage, say 10, 15 doors at most. This is a really great option for them, because you buy the box, you buy the cards, and you don't have to buy anything else. You don't have to any monthly fees to deal with a server for management, or you don't have to deal with anything like that. You buy the unit, you're pretty much solid for the lifespan. So finally, let's go over a couple terms that we use today, because we haven't really used them ever before. So we've got, of course, RFID, which is just radio frequency identification. We all encounter this in our daily lives, whether you're shopping at a store, you're using your RFID card at your place of work. Of course, when you were able to go to work, I don't know if you are today, or say your fast pass if you're driving around, say up in the Bay Area, Southern California, or even over on the East Coast. They've got them all over the place. You've probably used an RFID tag. You might not have realized you used it, but you've definitely used it. Then we've got AES, which is probably one of the most simple ones that we have on here. That's Advanced Encryption Standard. Pretty simple, just, it's pretty standard across the board, where you'll see, basically different numbers attached to that AES, which is just that Advanced Encryption Standard, and then whatever the number is, it's just the number of bits that are basically used for that encryption. So in our case, we use that AES 128 bits, and those bits again are just ones and zeros. So you've got 128 characters that could potentially be either 1 or 0, which gives you that, potentially gigantic number of 2 to the 128th power, which is just so many numbers that it becomes hard for any standard PC to hack. And it's actually one of the first and only ciphers that are approved by the NSA, the National Security Administration, for top secret data. So you know that anything that's encrypted with AES is very, very secure. You really don't have to worry about it. Then finally, a code that we've used kind of interchangeably in other cyber schools, but something that could be good to define, is just a key code. And that's a series of numbers that would be used as a code for entry. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pretty standard. That can also be kind of used interchangeably just with, say, our standard outdoor intercom with keypad that does support that key code access feature. And overall, it's just a pretty common term that we do use, but I wanted to define it here.
Thank you for watching this edition of CyberSchool. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.